Let's move on to passage interpretation. We're going to take a look at a scene known as the dagger scene, Macbeth's second soliloquy, that happens in Act 2, Scene 1. So, to set the scene, Macbeth is waiting by himself for a signal from his wife to kill Duncan. This signal is what Macbeth calls a knell. By the way, a knell is a bell, right? And the tolling of a bell, right, is actually a symbol in a lot of literature that means death, right? And this is one of the earlier symbolic uses. In any case, Macbeth is waiting. He sees Banquo. Banquo says, Macbeth, let's talk about the witches sometime. And Macbeth says, I think not of them. He's lying, right? And when Banquo leaves, Macbeth starts to see a dagger in front of him. And the speech that he gives is addressing the dagger. Let's take a look. So, the servant exits. Again, we have the stage direction, which makes it clear that this is a soliloquy. And we know that soliloquies are important because they let us know how the characters are really feeling. They explain their inner thoughts without worrying about what others will think of them, because part of the illusion is that the character is alone and the audience isn't present. Okay? So, Macbeth begins with an apostrophe, right? He says, is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle toward my hand? Okay, so this is a rhetorical question, right? And he's asking whether this is a dagger that he sees before him. And it's interesting that the handle is towards his hand. So it's almost like the dagger is inviting Macbeth to kill Duncan. It's almost like fate is controlling Macbeth. And we need to ask, if this is a vision that Macbeth really sees, to what extent is he responsible for the murder? I don't think we can blame it all on fate, but if a supernatural vision is really tempting him by putting a handle of a dagger in his hand, then obviously he doesn't have the same control over his actions that I think someone ordinarily does when they're committing an act of murder. And I think this is one of the questions the play wants us to ask. After this first rhetorical question, we really see the apostrophe take hold, because thee means you, right? He says, come, let me clutch thee. Who is he talking to here? He's actually talking to the dagger, right? And again, this is an example of an implied stage direction, because we know that there could be the prop of the dagger on stage, but Shakespeare, unlike modern playwrights, doesn't choose to give that note in the text. We need to draw that reasonable conclusion ourselves. So he says, come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Again, he's talking to the dagger. He's using thee, the second person pronoun, in what counts as apostrophe. And what's interesting here is that Macbeth sees the dagger, right? He says, let me clutch thee, let me hold thee. So he grasps for it, but the dagger slides through his fingers, right? He sees thee, but he has thee not. And he asks, art thou not, fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? So what he means here is, why can I not feel you? Why are you not able to be sensed or perceived through my feeling, just as you are through my sight? Right? So he can see the dagger, but when he tries to grab it, he can't touch it. What's also interesting here is that Macbeth uses the phrase fatal vision to describe the dagger, right? So fatal here kind of can mean two things. One, fatal means deadly. And indeed, this dagger, as we'll see, marshals him towards death, right? It leads him to kill, so it's a deadly dagger, right? But it's also associated with fate, because this is a supernatural vision, as we mentioned, that is kind of ushering him towards fulfilling the prophecy that the witches give him earlier in the play, right? Towards committing murder so that he can become king, the final part of that first prophecy. And then, really, he transitions and Macbeth starts wondering, or art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation? So what's interesting here is that when Macbeth sees the witches in Act 1, Banquo's there. We established this. So we know that Macbeth's not just crazy, because Banquo sees them too. But now he's by himself. And so we have to ask, is Macbeth just going crazy? But what I think is one indication that he hasn't completely lost his mind is that Macbeth is aware that what's happening is crazy. He's saying, he actually is thinking to himself, am I going crazy? Right? Which is a sign that he's maintaining some sense of rationality, even as he's feeling all this pressure and tension before the murder. Okay? If we look at another important section of this soliloquy, and by the way, this is a really long soliloquy, so the final image we've excerpted from this, because we want to focus on what I think is most relevant to our discussion of the play. But Macbeth is asking, art thou an image proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain? So proceeding means coming, and the brain, the mind, so he's asking, are you a hallucination? So Macbeth shows a good degree of self-awareness here. And what's interesting is the adjectival phrase that he uses to describe brain is heat oppressed. So what he means here is, I think that he's under a lot of pressure, right, from his wife and the witches. We know that earlier in his first soliloquy, he doesn't even really want to kill Duncan, but now he's going through with it. So his brain is oppressed. He feels a lot of pressure. The state of tension that Macbeth is in kind of runs parallel to the state of tension that the audience is in as we're waiting for this murder to happen and waiting to see the consequences unfold on the stage before us. Macbeth says, I see thee yet in form as palpable as that which now I draw. So again, it's implied. There's a dagger in front of Macbeth, and he draws another dagger, right? To draw a dagger is to unsheath it. In other words, to take it out of its leather case and to hold it in a threatening way. So you can imagine Macbeth on stage holding his dagger, and then there's another dagger floating in front of him, and he's waiting to kill the king, right? Thou marshalst me the way that I was going. I think that this is an important sentence as well, because to marshal means to guide or to lead. So in one sense, the dagger that he sees is leading him to kill Duncan. But in another sense, Macbeth was already decided in his purpose of killing Duncan. So the vision is marshaling him or leading him the way that he was already going. And such an instrument I was to use. Mine eyes are made the fools of the other senses, meaning he can see the dagger, but he can't feel it, he can't hear it, he can't taste it or smell it, presumably, right? So there's a little bit of discordance between his sense of vision and his other senses, especially his sense of touch when he tries to reach the dagger. Or else worth all the rest. I see thee still, and this is an important moment, and on thy blade and dudgeon gouts of blood. So on the blade of the dagger, all of a sudden, we have this dagger appearing in front of Macbeth, right? And all of a sudden appears on the dagger blood, right? And what does this symbolize? The murder, right? Because as soon as the dagger has blood on it, it means that it's been used to kill somebody, okay? One thing we can comment on that we haven't brought up yet that relates to the poetic quality, I think, of Shakespeare's verse is the use of sound effects like the alliteration. Blade, blood, we have this repeated BL sound. So alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds, such as B. And here the alliterated B sounds are kind of developing a rhythm. They're also strong, what we call plosive sounds. Blood, blade, right? It builds the intensity. It builds the sense that a blow, a murder blow, is coming from the dagger into Duncan's body, right? Which was not so before. There is no such thing. It is the bloody business which informs thus to mine eyes. So again, we see this BL, B alliteration, right? This strong rhythmic quality of the repetition of consonants. But Macbeth concludes that there's no such thing. He says it's the bloody business which informs thus to mine eyes, meaning the bloody business is the plan to murder. And Macbeth concludes by saying, "There is no such thing as the dagger I'm imagining. Rather, my mind is thinking thoughts of murder, and therefore it is informing my eyes to see this hallucination, an image of a dagger." So this is a key scene because, one, it shows the tremendous pressure that Macbeth is under before he kills the king. Two, it's a point of very high tension for the audience, right? We need that comic relief in the next scene with the porter. Three, it's important because Macbeth's brain is beginning to deteriorate. By the time we see him in later acts at the banquet, when he sees Banquo's ghost, he's going to really have lost it. And in Act 5, he's very out of touch with reality. But we see the beginning of the change in his character that's a result of the witch's prophecy and his beginning to commit deeds that kind of violate the character that he has early in the play, right? And finally, this is important because even though Macbeth is going crazy, he's still self-aware. He knows that he's hallucinating. By the time Macbeth has his next hallucination, where he sees the ghost of Banquo in Act 3, he has no idea that he's hallucinating. He's convinced that he sees the ghost of Banquo, even though everyone around him at the banquet is shocked by how crazy he's acting. Okay, so very important soliloquy that shows Macbeth's feelings and builds the rising action up to the murder, and also helps to show the change in Macbeth's character from reasonable and virtuous and loyal to increasingly crazy, disloyal, and ultimately being led towards his tragic conclusion. I'm Edward Dunnigan. Today we talked in Section 8 about Act 2. We gave a synopsis of all the key events in the 4 scenes. We saw that there are only 4 scenes and action happens very quickly, but a lot does occur in this second act as we build up the rising action towards the climax in Act 3. We took a look at some important moments for analysis in these 4 scenes, but as always, remember that there's plenty more for you to look into at home, so please do look through those texts, look through your play, and try to think of other things that you could analyze in these 4 scenes. And finally, we ended by looking at Macbeth's second soliloquy, the famous dagger speech, and we saw that really Macbeth's character is changing and he's under tremendous pressure, moments away from murdering Duncan. I look forward to seeing all of you in our next lesson. Again, I'm Edward Dunnigan, partnering with the Bund Education, and thank you for tuning in to our course on close reading Macbeth.